Police stations are supposed to be the safest buildings in any city. They are filled with trained officers, surveillance cameras, and people who are paid to be skeptical. They deal in facts, evidence, proof. So when officers, not ghost hunters, not paranormal enthusiasts, but actual law enforcement, start reporting footsteps in empty hallways, equipment malfunctioning with no explanation, and figures standing in rooms that have just been cleared, you have to ask yourself, what exactly are they seeing? Today we are looking at 3 police stations that are not just rumored to be haunted. They are documented. Reports were filed. Investigations were conducted. And in every single case, the activity was never explained. Let us start with one that made local news and left an entire department shaken. Espanola, New Mexico, a small city of around 10,000 people, sitting in the high desert of Rio Arriba County. It is a place with deep roots, settled long before the United States existed, built on land that has seen centuries of history, loss, and violence. In 2014, the Espanola Police Department began experiencing something that their officers could not explain away. It started small, the way it almost always does. Officers working the night shift reported hearing sounds in parts of the building that were empty. Not sounds from outside, sounds from inside. Footsteps, doors that would creak or shift when no one was near them. The sensation of being watched in rooms where the officer was completely alone. But it escalated. Officers began reporting a specific figure, a shadowy presence seen in the back areas of the station, near the holding cells and the evidence room. One officer reportedly refused to work certain areas of the building alone at night. That is not a small thing. These are men and women trained to run toward danger, and something in that building made them uncomfortable enough to speak up. What makes the Espanola case particularly compelling is the response from the department itself. Rather than dismissing the reports, leadership took them seriously enough to bring in outside help. A local paranormal investigation team was invited into the station to document what was happening. The investigators set up equipment overnight. What they captured has been described as unexplained voices, sounds recorded in empty rooms that had no source. EVP, or electronic voice phenomenon, is one of the most debated forms of paranormal evidence. But the Espanola recordings stood out because the sounds were not vague. They were distinct, responsive. When investigators asked questions in the empty holding area, something answered. The historical context of the building adds another layer. Espanola and the surrounding Rio Arriba County have one of the most complex and at times tragic histories in the American Southwest. The land carries weight, and police stations, by their very nature, are places where human suffering concentrates, where people are brought at the worst moments of their lives. If any environment were to hold residual energy, a building like this would be a candidate. The activity was never definitively explained. The department has not made further public statements, but the investigation exists. The recordings exist, and the officers who experienced it have not walked those reports back. Across the Pacific, on the island of Oahu, a brand new building was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it brought something with it from the very beginning. Kapolei is a planned city on the west side of Oahu, modern, developed, designed from the ground up. It does not have the age of Espanola. There are no centuries-old ruins nearby. On the surface, it should be one of the last places you would expect a haunting. But in Hawaii, the land itself tells a different story. The Kapolei Police Station began receiving reports of paranormal activity not long after it opened. Officers described unexplained sounds, footsteps, voices, movement, in areas of the building that were confirmed to be empty. Security footage reportedly captured anomalies that could not be attributed to equipment malfunction or environmental causes. What makes the Kapolei case unique within Hawaiian culture is that it is not treated as extraordinary. In Hawaii, the concept of the supernatural is woven deeply into everyday life. The islands have an extensive tradition surrounding spirits, sacred land, and the idea that the dead do not always move on. Officers and staff at the Kapolei station reportedly did not dismiss the activity. Many accepted it as a natural consequence of where they were working. There is a specific cultural element tied to this case that investigators and locals have pointed to: the concept of the land's history beneath a modern structure. Oahu, like all the Hawaiian islands, has layers of history beneath every new building. Burial grounds, Battle sites, sacred spaces that predate Western contact by centuries. Construction in Hawaii regularly uncovers human remains, and protocols exist specifically because this happened so frequently. The question that was raised around the Kapolei station was not just what was happening, but what or who had been disturbed. Multiple officers over multiple shifts reported the same phenomena independently of one another. That consistency is what separates documented cases from rumor. When people who do not know each other's experiences describe the same things in the same locations, it becomes difficult to attribute entirely to suggestion or imagination. The activity at Kapolei has never been publicly resolved. The department has not issued formal findings, but the reports exist across multiple sources, and the station remains one of the most consistently discussed paranormal locations in Hawaiian law enforcement history. Our final station takes us to the East Coast, to a case that is older, darker, and involves a history that may explain everything that happened inside those walls. Homestead, Pennsylvania. A borough just outside Pittsburgh, sitting on the banks of the Monongahela River. In the late 1800s, Homestead was the center of one of the most violent and consequential labor conflicts in American history. The Homestead Strike of 1892, a battle between Carnegie steel workers and Pinkerton agents that left multiple people dead and changed the course of American labor law. The ground in Homestead has memory. In 2008, the Homestead Borough Police Department became the subject of a formal paranormal investigation after officers began reporting activity inside the station that could not be explained through conventional means. The reports were specific. Officers described cold spots in areas of the building that had no drafts and no reason to be cold. Lights flickered in patterns that electricians could not attribute to wiring issues. Objects were reportedly moved, not dramatically, not in ways that could be filmed for effect, but subtly. Things placed in one location found in another, small enough to be dismissed once, impossible to keep dismissing after the 10th time. But the most reported phenomenon at Homestead was sound. Officers on overnight shifts described hearing what they characterized as voices, low, indistinct, coming from rooms that had been checked and cleared. One account described the sound of what seemed like an argument, heard through a wall, in a room that was empty and locked. When the room was entered, nothing was there. The sound stopped. A paranormal investigation team documented the Homestead station in 2008, and their findings added to an already unsettling picture. Equipment registered temperature anomalies in areas officers had already flagged independently. Audio recordings captured sounds in empty rooms during quiet periods of the investigation. The historical weight of Homestead is impossible to separate from what was reported there. This is a town built on industrial labor, on struggle, on death. The police department itself operated in a community that had seen some of the darkest chapters of American working-class history. If residual haunting, the theory that traumatic events leave an imprint on a location, has any basis in reality, Homestead would be exactly the kind of place where it would manifest. The 2008 investigation was documented, and the findings were shared publicly. Like the cases in Espanola and Kapolei, no definitive explanation was ever given. The activity continued to be reported after the investigation concluded. 3 stations, 3 different states, 3 different histories. And in every single case, the people reporting the activity were not ghost hunters looking for content. They were law enforcement officers, trained observers, trained skeptics, who filed reports and allowed outside investigators in because what they were experiencing had no explanation they could find on their own. That is what separates these cases from legend. The documentation exists. The witness accounts are consistent, and the activity in every location was never resolved. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, one question is worth sitting with. If the people trained to be the most skeptical in the room cannot explain it, what would it take for you to believe? If this case left you with questions, the comments are open. And if you want more documented cases, locations with real reports, real investigations, and no clean answers, make sure you are subscribed. There are more stories where these came from.